Expanding on the topic of Custer's movements on June 24th, we delve deeper into one of the most fascinating and contentious moments in American history. The question of whether General George Armstrong Custer had already made the decision to attack the Sioux village, disregarding the explicit orders from his superior, General Alfred Terry, looms large. If we are to understand the complexities of Custer's actions that day, we must explore not only the circumstances, but also the psychological and strategic implications of his choices. The historical evidence surrounding Custer's mindset is notoriously scant and often circumstantial, yet certain clues emerge, hinting at a premeditated intent to engage the Sioux. Among these clues, the prolonged 4-hour halt between 1 and 5 p.m. stands out. During this time, Custer remained largely inactive, even as his scouts were tirelessly working to gather intelligence on the Sioux's movements. This inactivity is perplexing, especially considering the urgency of the situation. With the trails growing fresher by the hour, one must wonder why Custer chose to stall rather than push forward. This pause becomes even more intriguing when we consider the context. The trails indicated that the Sioux were not far off. Even the least experienced soldiers would have grasped that they were within a day or two's ride. The air would have been thick with tension, the scent of impending conflict hanging in the atmosphere. So, was Custer merely waiting for Captain Varnum's return, or was there something more at play? The inexplicable nature of this delay raises questions about Custer's decision-making process and strategic considerations. It is essential to recognize that Custer was not only a military leader, but also a man driven by ambition and a desire for glory. Throughout his career, he had cultivated a reputation as a daring cavalry officer, one who thrived on the edge of risk. This desire for fame and recognition may have clouded his judgment, leading him to prioritize personal glory over the collective strategy devised by his superiors. The very fabric of military hierarchy was at stake, yet Custer seemed unfazed by the consequences of his potential insubordination. Moreover, we must consider the psychological factors that may have influenced Custer's decision-making. The pressure of command, combined with the expectation of achieving a decisive victory, could have created a psychological cocktail that spurred him toward impulsive actions. As he sat, contemplating the landscape before him, perhaps he envisioned the glory that would come from defeating a formidable enemy. This vision may have overshadowed his duty to follow orders and coordinate with General Terry's larger strategy. The uncertainty surrounding Custer's motives invites speculation. What if he had already resolved to attack the Sioux village, believing that the element of surprise could tilt the scales in his favor? If he viewed the Sioux as a fragmented force, ripe for a decisive strike, the notion of waiting for reinforcements may have seemed counterintuitive. Custer could have been emboldened by past successes, underestimating the Sioux's resolve and tactical acumen. Custer's relationship with his men also plays a critical role in understanding his actions that day. He had earned the loyalty of many of his soldiers, yet he also bore the burden of their lives in the face of imminent danger. Did he weigh the lives of his men against the possibility of military glory? In the heat of battle, the lines between valor and recklessness can blur, and Custer's desire to lead his men into a heroic charge may have influenced his decision to disregard the potential dangers ahead. The possibility that the Sioux were tracking Custer's movements adds another layer of complexity to this narrative. The Indigenous warriors were no strangers to guerrilla tactics and had demonstrated a profound understanding of the terrain. If they were aware of Custer's presence, would they not have been prepared for an encounter? Custer's choice to pause, then, could have been strategic in nature, a way to gather information and assess the landscape before making a potentially fatal move. However, in the absence of concrete evidence of such a strategy, one is left to ponder whether Custer was overconfident, believing he could dictate the terms of the encounter. As we attempt to reconstruct the events of that fateful day, we are faced with the realities of fragmented historical accounts. Each piece of evidence serves as a puzzle that can be interpreted in various ways, reflecting the biases and perspectives of those who recorded them. The ambiguity surrounding Custer's decision-making can lead us down many paths of inquiry, all of which converge on the critical moment of choice. In essence, June 24th remains a pivotal point in the larger narrative of Custer's last stand. The decisions made in that brief window of time would reverberate throughout history, affecting not only the lives of the soldiers involved, but also the future of the Sioux Nation. Custer's legacy is forever entwined with questions of leadership, ambition, and the complex dynamics of war. In conclusion, as we reflect on the events of June 24th, we are not merely examining a military campaign. We are engaging with the profound implications of choice and consequence. The decision to attack or hold back carries weight far beyond the battlefield. It reflects the intricate interplay between ambition, duty, and the moral dilemmas faced by leaders in times of crisis. Custer's actions, shrouded in mystery and speculation, invite us to explore the deeper truths of human nature and the challenges of leadership in the face of uncertainty. The legacy of that day continues to resonate, compelling us to ask, what would we have done in Custer's position, standing at the crossroads of history? As the sun began its slow descent on that fateful June afternoon, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain of Tulloch's Valley, the air was thick with anticipation and tension. The valley, a sprawling expanse of open plains interspersed with clusters of sturdy pine trees, had long been a strategic point for both the U.S. Army and the indigenous tribes inhabiting the region. It was here that the paths of two formidable groups were destined to intersect, setting the stage for a dramatic and consequential encounter. Among the Cheyenne warriors patrolling the outskirts of the valley were two distinguished figures, Big Crow and Black White Man. These warriors, known for their keen eyesight and unparalleled tracking skills, had been entrusted with the critical task of monitoring the movements of the U.S. soldiers. Earlier that afternoon, as the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the landscape, Big Crow and Black White Man had successfully identified the soldiers' encampment nestled within a clearing, strategically positioned to overlook the valley's entrance. Their sharp eyes had caught every detail: the arrangement of tents, the flickering of campfires, and the restless shifts of soldiers preparing for the night ahead. Despite the gravity of their discovery, the two Cheyenne leaders seemed to exercise restraint in disseminating this vital intelligence. This measured approach, while prudent in certain contexts, bore an unsettling resemblance to the complacency exhibited by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer regarding his own reconnaissance efforts. Custer, renowned for his aggressive tactics and bold strategies, had paradoxically shown a surprising degree of inaction when it came to thoroughly scouting the surrounding areas, particularly Tulloch's Valley. His underestimation of the Sioux and Cheyenne forces lurking in the vicinity would prove to be a critical oversight with dire consequences. The complexity of the situation was further compounded by the movements of Little Wolf, a respected and influential leader among the Cheyenne. Leading a contingent from the Red Cloud Agency, Little Wolf had been coordinating efforts to consolidate the Sioux and Cheyenne tribes in the face of increasing military pressure. However, due to a combination of logistical challenges and intertribal negotiations, Little Wolf's group did not reach the larger Sioux encampment until after Custer had already engaged them on June 25th. This delay in communication and coordination meant that any strategic advantage Little Wolf's intelligence might have provided was effectively nullified, leaving the Sioux and Cheyenne forces to respond reactively rather than proactively. The interplay of these factors, the limited dissemination of crucial information by Big Crow and Black White Man, Custer's complacent reconnaissance, and the delayed arrival of Little Wolf's contingent, painted a picture of mutual inaction and missed opportunities on both sides. This scenario raises profound questions about the underlying motivations and strategic calculations at play. Was Custer's decision to delay action a deliberate component of a broader, more intricate strategy aimed at luring the Sioux and Cheyenne into a trap? Or was it a manifestation of hesitation, a momentary lapse in judgment where the urgency of impending conflict was not fully recognized? As twilight approached, the camp was gradually enveloped in the cloak of darkness. The transition from day to night brought with it a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The earlier bustling activity gave way to a hushed stillness. broken only by the occasional crackle of a dying campfire or the distant call of a nocturnal animal. It was in this dimming light that Major Marcus Reno, along with his scouts, was dispatched to trace the extensive trail left by the Sioux forces. Reno, a seasoned officer with a reputation for tactical acumen, understood the importance of timely intelligence in the lead-up to any military engagement. His mission was clear: follow the Sioux' movements, assess their strength and positioning, and relay actionable information back to the command center. Reno's scouts, a group of hardy and experienced trackers, embarked on their mission with a blend of determination and caution. The vast trail they followed was a testament to the Sioux' strategic mobility, winding through the undulating hills and dense thickets that characterized Tulloch's Valley. Each footprint, broken branch, and disturbed patch of earth served as markers guiding them deeper into enemy territory. The scouts moved with practiced silence, their senses attuned to the subtle signs of the Sioux' presence. The task was arduous, demanding not only physical endurance, but also a keen intellect to interpret the myriad signs left behind by the advancing warriors. Meanwhile, back at Custer's camp, the atmosphere was one of uneasy anticipation. The tension among the soldiers was palpable, tempered by the rigid discipline instilled by their officers. Custer, ever the charismatic leader, rallied his men with fervent speeches that emphasized courage, honor, and the inevitability of victory. His presence exuded confidence, a trait that had earned him both admiration and scrutiny within the military ranks. Yet, beneath this veneer of assurance lay the seeds of uncertainty, as even the most steadfast soldiers could not entirely quell the underlying apprehension about the encroaching forces they faced. As night deepened, the camp's perimeter was meticulously secured, with soldiers taking their positions and ensuring that no unauthorized movements went unnoticed. The flickering light of the lanterns cast eerie shadows that danced across the tents, heightening the sense of impending confrontation. Custer, recognizing the critical juncture at which his expedition stood, took a moment to reflect on the day's events. The decision to delay engagement, the reliance on incomplete reconnaissance, and the fragmented intelligence from allied tribes weighed heavily on his mind. It was a moment of introspection that underscored the complexities of leadership in the midst of conflict. The interplay of strategic decisions and the flow of intelligence, or lack thereof, set the stage for what would become a pivotal moment in the annals of American military history. The night before the battle was a tapestry woven with threads of uncertainty, courage, and the inexorable march toward destiny. As Varnum and his scouts continued their pursuit of the Sioux' elusive trail, the broader narrative of ambition, resistance, and the clash of civilizations was unfolding with each passing hour. In the days leading up to June 25th, the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors were mobilizing under the leadership of notable figures like Crazy Horse and Little Wolf. Their movements were not merely reactive, but part of a larger, coordinated effort to defend their lands and way of life against the encroaching forces of the United States Army. The strategies employed by these indigenous leaders were rooted in a deep understanding of the terrain, the psychological aspects of warfare, and the imperative to maintain unity among the various tribes. The alliance between the Sioux and Cheyenne was a testament to their resilience and determination to counter the external threats posed by military expansion. On the other side, Custer's detachment, often referred to as Custer's Battalion, was a smaller contingent tasked with reconnaissance and the assertion of U.S. presence in the region. Custer's aggressive approach, while lauded by some as bold and decisive, was criticized by others for its lack of thoroughness and overconfidence. The decision to engage the Sioux and Cheyenne without sufficient intelligence gathering or understanding of the enemy's strength and disposition was a gamble that ultimately had far-reaching consequences. As dawn broke on June 25th, the valley was transformed into a battleground. The first light revealed the formidable numbers of the Sioux and Cheyenne, their war cries echoing across the plains as they prepared to defend their territory. The clash that ensued was fierce and unforgiving, a testament to the valor and strategic prowess of both sides. Custer's forces, despite their training and discipline, were overwhelmed by the sheer number and tactical ingenuity of the Indigenous warriors. The battle, often remembered as the Battle of the Little Bighorn, became a defining moment in the struggle between the United States and the Native American tribes. In retrospect, the events leading up to the battle highlight the intricate dynamics of intelligence, leadership, and decision-making in the context of military engagements. The initial sightings by Big Crow and Black White Man, the delayed arrival of Little Wolf, and Custer's strategic choices collectively contributed to the unfolding of history. The lessons gleaned from this episode underscore the importance of timely and accurate intelligence, the value of inter-allied communication, and the critical need for adaptability in leadership. Moreover, the human element, the courage of the Cheyenne warriors, the determination of the Sioux leaders, and the complex motivations of Custer and his men adds layers of depth to the historical narrative. These individuals, each driven by their own convictions and circumstances, played pivotal roles in shaping the outcome of the events in Tulloch's Valley. Their stories, interwoven with themes of honor, resilience, and tragedy, continue to resonate as poignant reminders of the profound impacts of conflict and the enduring spirit of those who partake in it. As historians and enthusiasts continue to study and interpret the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the expanded understanding of the preceding events offers a more nuanced perspective. It reveals the multifaceted nature of warfare, where strategic brilliance and oversight coexist, and where the actions of a few can alter the course of history. The intricate dance of reconnaissance, communication, and combat serves as a timeless illustration of the complexities inherent in human endeavors, especially those as consequential as war. In conclusion, the narrative surrounding Custer's engagement in Tulloch's Valley is a rich tapestry of strategic decisions, cultural clashes, and individual heroism. By delving deeper into the actions and motivations of the key players, Big Crow, Black White Man, Little Wolf, Custer, Varnum, and the myriad soldiers and warriors on both sides, we gain a more comprehensive and engaging understanding of this pivotal moment in history. It serves as a compelling case study in leadership, the significance of intelligence in military strategy, and the enduring impact of human decisions in the face of destiny. As twilight descended on the vast expanse of Tulloch's Valley, the atmosphere was thick with tension and uncertainty. Several scouts had recently returned from their reconnaissance missions, bearing reports that the Sioux had made a strategic shift westward, crossing the formidable divide to the lower reaches of the Little Bighorn River. This movement was significant, signaling a potential change in the Sioux' tactical approach and positioning. However, amidst these developments, a lingering ambiguity persisted. It remained unclear whether the Sioux were advancing downstream or if their intentions lay elsewhere. This uncertainty was particularly perplexing given the meticulous nature of Terry's overarching strategy. Terry, an officer known for his methodical planning and keen strategic mind, had devised a comprehensive plan aimed at cornering the Sioux forces. His strategy was to first scout the upper reaches of the Rosebud River, an area known for its challenging terrain and dense foliage, which could provide both concealment and natural barriers. From there, his forces were to cross to the upper Little Bighorn, a critical juncture that would serve as a springboard for further maneuvers. The ultimate objective was to drive the Sioux toward a predetermined blocking force that Terry had earmarked for the 26th of June, effectively hemming them in and preventing any tactical retreat or regrouping. However, as the evening of the 24th approached, Terry found himself still 30 miles away from his intended target location. This delay was not merely a logistical hiccup, but a pivotal juncture that introduced a significant element of uncertainty into the unfolding scenario. The distance remaining underscored the vastness of the terrain challenges inherent in rapid troop movements across such a sprawling landscape. Moreover, the delay raised questions about the feasibility of Terry's timeline, and whether the Sioux might exploit this window to reposition themselves advantageously. In the midst of these strategic considerations, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, a prominent and often controversial figure within the military hierarchy, found himself grappling with a formidable dilemma. Custer, known for his audacious tactics and aggressive approach to warfare, was now faced with a critical decision that could alter the course of the impending conflict. His options were stark and fraught with potential consequences. On one hand, Custer could choose to persist in following the Rosebud River, adhering to the initial intelligence that suggested the Sioux were making a westward movement. This course of action seemed logical, driven by the urgency to intercept the enemy before they could consolidate their strength. However, continuing along this path came with significant risks that could jeopardize not only his mission but also the lives of his men. The terrain along the Rosebud was unforgiving. Thick underbrush, intertwined with towering trees, created a labyrinth that could easily conceal enemy movements. Each bend of the river and each cluster of bushes became potential hiding spots for Sioux warriors, skilled in the art of ambush. The unpredictable weather patterns further complicated the situation. Sudden storms could sweep through the area, reducing visibility and making it difficult to navigate. Rain could turn the ground into a treacherous muck, hindering progress and exhausting the troops as they struggled to maintain their footing. By staying the course along the Rosebud, Custer risked detection by the Sioux, who were not only familiar with the land, but also adept at utilizing its features to their advantage. The Sioux knew the river's winding paths and the best vantage points to launch a surprise attack. This intimate knowledge of the terrain could lead to Custer's forces being ambushed or drawn into skirmishes that might deplete his numbers and morale. Such encounters could easily turn into desperate fights for survival, compromising their mission objectives and leaving Custer vulnerable to the much larger Sioux forces. Moreover, maintaining pursuit along the Rosebud could stretch Custer's already limited resources thin. Provisions for his men were finite, and the longer they remained on the move, the more they would consume. Supply lines could become precarious, especially if the journey took longer than anticipated. The challenges of resupplying in hostile territory loomed large, making it increasingly difficult to sustain a prolonged engagement. A battle without adequate supplies was a battle lost, and Custer had to weigh the implications of his decisions carefully. In addition to the physical challenges, there were psychological burdens on the minds of Custer's men. They had come to rely on their leader's instincts, but the uncertainty of their path could lead to doubt and unrest within the ranks. Soldiers who felt vulnerable and unsupported were less likely to fight effectively. Custer needed to maintain their confidence, but how could he do that if he felt uncertain about their direction? The weight of leadership pressed heavily upon him, knowing that every choice he made could lead to victory or disaster. At the same time, an alternative strategy loomed in his mind, perhaps veering off the Rosebud to seek more favorable ground or even retreating to regroup. However, such a shift could be interpreted as a sign of weakness or indecision, potentially emboldening the Sioux. Custer's reputation as a fearless leader hinged on his ability to make bold decisions, and retreating could tarnish that image in the eyes of his men and the broader military establishment. Custer was acutely aware of the narratives that surrounded him. The tales of heroism and bravery from previous battles echoed in his ears. He was not merely a military commander. He was a symbol of American expansionism and the relentless push into Native American territories. The stakes were not just personal, but emblematic of a larger conflict. To falter now could mean more than losing a battle. It could signify a retreat of ideals and ambitions that fueled his very existence. As he stood on the banks of the Rosebud, the water flowing steadily past him, Custer felt the weight of history upon his shoulders. He was at a crossroads, not merely of rivers, but of fate. The choice before him was not just a tactical decision. It was a defining moment that would shape the legacy of his career and the future of the lands they sought to conquer. In the distance, he could hear the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the low murmurs of his men as they awaited his command. They looked to him for guidance, and in that moment he realized that his decision would ripple far beyond the immediate conflict. It would echo through the annals of time, a tale of courage or folly that would be recounted for generations. Custer inhaled deeply, his mind racing with possibilities and consequences. acutely aware that the river before him symbolized both opportunity and peril. Ultimately, he understood that the choice he faced was a reflection of the tumultuous era in which he lived, a time marked by clashes of cultures, aspirations, and the relentless march of history. Whether he chose to advance or retreat, Custer knew that his actions would not only affect his fate, but would also resonate throughout the unfolding narrative of a nation striving to define itself amidst chaos and conflict. On the other hand, Custer could opt for a more audacious strategy, crossing the divide during the cover of night. This maneuver would involve moving his forces across a challenging and elevated terrain, seeking to remain concealed under the cloak of darkness. The potential benefits of this approach were manifold. By crossing the divide stealthily, Custer could position his troops in a vantage point that offered a broader perspective of the Sioux movements and possibly catch them off guard. This element of surprise could provide a tactical advantage, allowing Custer to execute a decisive strike before the Sioux had a chance to fully organize their defenses. However, this daring plan was not without its own set of risks. Navigating the divide under the cover of night required precise coordination and flawless execution. Any misstep could lead to the entire maneuver being compromised, leaving Custer's forces vulnerable to counterattacks or loss of cohesion. Additionally, the physical demands of such a night crossing could take a toll on the soldiers, potentially affecting their morale and combat readiness. The uncertainty surrounding the Sioux's true intentions only added to the complexity of Custer's decision-making process. Without clear intelligence on whether the Sioux were indeed moving downstream or diverting their course, committing to a night crossing could result in strategic miscalculations. As Custer weighed these options, the broader implications of his decision loomed large. His choice would not only influence the immediate tactical situation, but also shape the morale and operational effectiveness of his troops. A cautious approach, while minimizing immediate risks, might be perceived as indecisiveness or lack of resolve, potentially undermining his leadership in the eyes of his men. Conversely, a bold move could galvanize his forces, instilling a sense of purpose and determination, but it also carried the peril of overextension and heightened vulnerability. The internal dynamics within Custer's command structure also played a role in this pivotal moment. His officers and scouts, seasoned by numerous campaigns and familiar with the harsh realities of frontier warfare, offered diverse perspectives on the best course of action. Some advocated for prudence, emphasizing the need to avoid unnecessary confrontations until more definitive intelligence could be gathered. Others echoed Custer's inherent boldness, urging him to seize the initiative and assert dominance over the Sioux forces through aggressive maneuvers. Meanwhile, the Sioux, like visionary leaders such as Crazy Horse and Little Wolf, were meticulously orchestrating their own strategies. Their movements were not merely reactive, but part of a larger, cohesive plan aimed at preserving their territories and way of life against the encroaching forces of the United States Army. The Sioux's adept use of the terrain, combined with their deep knowledge of the land, allowed them to execute complex maneuvers that often caught their adversaries off guard. Their strategic shifting westward was likely a calculated effort to draw Custer's forces into a position that could be exploited to their advantage, leveraging the element of surprise and the vastness of the landscape to offset the numerical and technological superiority of the U.S. Army. As the night of the 24th progressed, the tension within Custer's camp was palpable. Soldiers moved with a heightened sense of vigilance, their senses attuned to the slightest sounds that might indicate the presence of the Sioux. The flickering flames of campfires cast long shadows that danced eerily across the tents, mirroring the uncertainty that enveloped the command. Custer, standing atop a makeshift ridge overlooking the valley, gazed into the darkness, his mind racing through the myriad possibilities and outcomes of his impending decision. The stars above provided scant illumination, their distant light barely penetrating the thick canopy of the night sky. In this moment of solitude, Custer reflected on the weight of leadership and the profound responsibility that rested on his shoulders. The lives of his men, the success of his mission, and the broader implications for the ongoing conflict between the U.S. Army and the Sioux weighed heavily on his conscience. Every decision he made had the potential to alter the delicate balance of power and influence the course of history. As dawn approached on the morning of June 25th, the valley was shrouded in a serene stillness, the calm before the inevitable storm. Custer had made his choice. Opting for the daring night crossing, he mobilized his troops with a mix of urgency and precision. The soldiers, though weary from the night's exertions, responded with unwavering commitment, driven by Custer's unwavering resolve and the collective spirit that bound them together. The divide was crossed under the cover of darkness, the movements of the troops swift and deliberate, their presence barely perceptible to the untrained eye. Meanwhile, Terry's forces continued their advance toward the upper Little Bighorn, inching closer to their strategic objective. The coordination between Terry and Custer was crucial, each contingent playing a complementary role in the broader strategy to encircle and contain the Sioux forces. However, the dynamic nature of warfare meant that adaptability and real-time intelligence were paramount. The delay in Terry's movement had already introduced a variable that necessitated quick thinking and flexibility on Custer's part. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the landscape, the stage was set for a confrontation that would etch itself into the annals of military history. The Sioux, ever vigilant, had anticipated the potential maneuvers of their adversaries and were prepared to exploit any vulnerabilities. The impending clash was not merely a test of tactical prowess, but a profound struggle for survival, autonomy, and the preservation of cultural identity. In the hours that followed, the valley transformed into a theater of strategic maneuvers and calculated risks. Custer's daring night crossing allowed his forces to gain a positional advantage, setting the stage for a decisive engagement. The interplay between Custer's boldness and Terry's methodical approach created a dynamic that was both unpredictable and charged with potential. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the valley in its full splendor, the inevitability of the impending confrontation became increasingly apparent. The decisions made on the evening of the 24th, Custer's choice to cross the divide under the cover of night, proved to be a turning point in the unfolding drama. This act of calculated risk-taking exemplified the complexities of military leadership, where the balance between caution and aggression could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The ramifications of these choices reverberated through the subsequent hours, shaping the fate of both the Sioux and the U.S. Army in profound and lasting ways. In retrospect, the events leading up to this critical moment highlight the intricate dance of strategy, intelligence, and human decision-making that defines military engagements. The initial reports of the Sioux's westward shift, the ambiguity surrounding their true intentions, Terry's strategic plan, and Custer's bold dilemma collectively wove a narrative rich in tension and potential. Each element played a crucial role in setting the stage for the Battle of the Little Bighorn, a conflict that would come to symbolize the fierce resistance of Native American tribes against the expansionist policies of the United States. The expanded narrative not only provides a more comprehensive account of the strategic considerations and personal dilemmas faced by the key figures involved, but also delves into the broader thematic elements of leadership, risk, and the profound impacts of individual decisions on the course of history. By exploring these dimensions in greater depth, the story becomes more engaging and evocative, capturing the complexity and gravity of the events that unfolded in Tulloch's Valley. If Custer had chosen the latter option, he might have preserved the element of surprise while attacking from a strategic advantage, effectively blocking the Sioux from retreating eastward. The stakes were incredibly high. Failure could spell disaster, but success promised significant rewards, provided his timing and execution were impeccable. Alternatively, Custer could have heeded Terry's cautious counsel to advance up the Rosebud River and begin his descent into the Little Bighorn Valley on the 25th. Yet, even a night march would have left the soldiers leaving a conspicuous trail, alerting the Sioux and causing the village to disperse. This scenario would likely result in Custer losing track of the village, and worse, allow the Sioux to escape undetected, and potentially launch a counterattack against Terry's advancing forces. Historian John Gray sympathetically portrays Custer's dilemma, excusing the general's hesitations and indecisiveness. However, historical accounts reveal that many Sioux and Cheyenne warriors observed the approaching cavalry but chose not to warn the main village, possibly due to overconfidence or misjudgment, a critical lapse given the battle's eventual significance. Custer remained determined to locate and engage the village, whether acting alone or with Terry. In hindsight, one might question Custer's judgment, but his mission objectives and the proximity of the Sioux left him little room for hesitation. Assuming the Sioux village was moving downstream, time was becoming a critical factor. Custer needed to act swiftly to prevent the Sioux from fleeing or engaging Terry's forces. Conflicting reports about the Sioux's exact movements only added to the uncertainty. Were the Crows truly observing the Sioux moving downstream, or were they merely speculating based on fresh tracks? While it was clear the Sioux were along the lower Little Bighorn, their precise movements remained unclear, further complicating Custer's decisions. Back at the Busby camp, after receiving updates from scouts, Custer convened his officers to outline a plan for a night march. His goal was to cross the divide unnoticed and position his troops for a surprise attack. Veterans who had fought with Custer at the Battle of Washita in 1868 might have recognized the echoes of his previous strategies. Despite earlier indecision, fresh intelligence from the Crow Scouts cemented his resolve. Custer's urgency to outpace Terry and Gibbon underscored his confidence and thirst for personal glory, even at great risk. At 9:20 p.m., Varnum and 15 scouts departed for the Crow's Nest, an elevated vantage point 11 to 12 miles away. Shortly after they left, Custer briefed his officers, stressing the importance of secrecy. He planned to strike on the morning of the 26th once the village was located. As preparations for the night march progressed, darkness enveloped the landscape. By 11:48 p.m., the crescent moon had set, plunging the area into total darkness. The decisions made at this moment had far-reaching consequences. Custer's bold approach left little room for flexibility. His unwavering confidence to attack the village, despite the looming threat of a larger Sioux force, highlighted both his audacity and the dangers of overconfidence. This episode highlights a central theme of the Custer campaign: time. Without a clear timeline of events, evaluating the actions and decisions of those involved becomes challenging. Dr. John S. Gray's analysis in Custer's last campaign attempts to address this issue, though it is tinged with his own biases, forcing the timeline to align with his theories. Nevertheless, the sequence of events on June 24th remains pivotal in understanding Custer's fate. Analyzing the time dynamics during the Battle of Little Bighorn requires acknowledging the absence of standardized time in 1876, adding complexity to interpreting historical events. Time zones, as we know them today, were not established until 1883 after the Prime Meridian Conference in Washington, D.C., where the United States adopted Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. Before then, towns relied on local timekeeping, often as rudimentary as a store's clock. In the case of Custer's 7th Cavalry, there is debate over whether they followed local solar time or a more centralized standard like St. Paul or Chicago time. Some argue that Custer's regiment likely adhered to headquarters time from St. Paul, which would have been nearly an hour ahead of local time at Little Bighorn, causing timing discrepancies during the battle. Historian John Gray strongly supported the idea that the troops followed local solar time, suggesting that their westward movement required constant watch adjustments. However, this emphasis on time adjustments might be overstated. Soldiers on prolonged campaigns were often more attuned to the sun's position than their unreliable, dust-covered watches. Additionally, many soldiers, including those in John Gibbon's Montana column, might have been using time standards set at Fort Ellis or even San Francisco, introducing further discrepancies among the converging forces at Little Bighorn. Historians like Gregory F. Micknow and Tom Heskey contest Gray's perspective, presenting evidence that some of Custer's men likely used St. Paul time, which was 57 minutes ahead of local solar time. Lieutenant George Wallace, for example, is believed to have operated on Chicago time, about an hour and a half ahead of Montana's solar time. A notable incident occurred on June 24th during the Busby Bivouac, when Custer's halt was recorded by Wallace at 7:45 p.m., roughly sunset in Montana. However, by St. Paul time, it would have been only 6:30 p.m., suggesting Wallace relied more on experience than his watch. This highlights the participants' ambivalence toward exact timing. Despite the battle's critical nature, precise times were rarely documented. Many accounts, including Wallace's, were based on approximate field observations rather than strict timekeeping. As former G Company Private Theodore W. Golden noted, neither soldiers nor officers clearly remembered the exact time between Reno's retreat and earlier maneuvers, emphasizing the limited role of precise time as a strategic factor. In which Custer made his fateful decisions. The interplay of strategy, timing, and human factors ultimately shaped the outcome of one of history's most infamous battles. Lieutenant Varnum's admission highlights the pervasive uncertainty that clouded the regiment's movements that fateful night. His estimates were not born from first-hand observations, but rather from the fragmented and second-hand accounts of his comrades. This confusion was exacerbated by the unreliable timepieces of the era. The harsh elements, relentless dust storms and bitter cold, took their toll on the soldiers' watches, rendering them often inaccurate or completely inoperative. Only a handful, like the interpreter Fred Gerard, possessed watches that remained functional. Gerard's watch had been meticulously cleaned before departing Fort Lincoln, lending his timing a semblance of reliability. Yet even his careful maintenance could not fully mitigate the chaos of impending battle, leaving us to wonder how often he could glance at his watch amidst the turmoil. Complicating matters further, official synchronization of watches was scant. The only documented instance occurred on June 22nd, during an officer's call, when Lieutenant Godfrey reported that watches were compared to establish a semblance of official time. Both Godfrey and Wallace later testified at the Reno Court of Inquiry that their watches had not been adjusted to local time, reinforcing the notion that the regiment likely operated on St. Paul time throughout the battle. This testimony directly contradicts John Gray's steadfast assertion that local solar time was the regiment's standard, throwing the accuracy of his timeline into question. The significance of precise timing becomes glaringly apparent when scrutinizing pivotal moments, such as Custer's decision to resume the march on June 24th after a 4-hour halt at East Muddy Creek. At this juncture, White Swan, a Crow scout, returned with news of a fresh encampment at the forks of the Rosebud River, while Varnum reported the reappearance of a trail initially spotted by Herendeen. Wallace confirmed that the march commenced at 5 p.m., providing one of the few reliable timestamps. Delving deeper, multiple witnesses, including Indian scouts, soldiers, and interpreters, placed key events around midday. Dr. Henry Rinaldo Porter of the Reno Column noted the first gun firing at approximately 1:30 p.m. St. Paul time, closely aligning with actual events. Gerard, the interpreter, also asserted that Reno's retreat occurred around 2 p.m., a plausible approximation that stands in stark contrast to Gray's claim that firing only began well after 2 p.m., even under local time. Native American accounts further corroborate a timeline centered around solar observations. Descriptions of the sun reaching its zenith, or the preparation of midday meals, align closely with the regiment's movements, suggesting that the timing was indeed closer to midday than Gray proposed. These indigenous perspectives, often marginalized in historical narratives, reinforce the accuracy of the military participants' accounts and undermine Gray's rigid adherence to local sun time. Expanding the scope of evidence, including testimonies from military personnel and Native American observers, it becomes evident that the regiment adhered more closely to headquarters time. This broader perspective renders Gray's interpretation less tenable, highlighting the critical role that accurate timing plays in reconstructing the Battle of Little Bighorn. Understanding these critical timings unveils a clearer picture of the strategies and miscalculations that ultimately defined the battle's outcome. Consider the next significant stop at 7:45 p.m., as recorded by Wallace at the Busby campsite. However, the distance from East Muddy Creek to Busby Bend, approximately 12 miles, necessitated a marching speed of nearly 4.5 miles per hour, a pace more akin to a brisk walk than a tactical advance. Yet, the actual conditions tell a different story. Wallace himself remarked, "We passed through several large camps. The trail was fresh now, and the whole valley scratched up by the trailing lodge poles." Similarly, George Herendine noted that as they resumed their march, the trail grew fresher, and several campsites appeared closely spaced, indicating that the Native Americans were moving slowly, likely only shifting to better grass. This gradual pace mirrored the regiment's movements, characterized by multiple halts and a slow, steady advance. Godfrey added, "The dry weather left a dusty trail, and we marched on separate paths to minimize the dust clouds. The valley was littered with lodgepole trails and pony tracks, revealing that large herds had crossed." These vivid descriptions undermine the feasibility of Wallace's reported 7:45 p.m. halt based on St. Paul time, suggesting instead that he was likely relying on local sun time, which would align more closely with reports of sunset. This adjustment recalibrates the march speed to a more plausible 3.2 miles per hour, fitting the regiment's slow and methodical progress through the treacherous, dusty terrain. The numerous stops, stream crossings, and dust clouds further support the notion that Wallace gauged time by the setting sun rather than strict watch readings. Custer, meanwhile, had been riding ahead with his scouts, who frequently returned with reports indicating that the Sioux had turned west toward the lower Little Bighorn. Their advice was to ride to a nearby promontory at dawn to scout the valley, a plan Custer agreed to, sending the Crow scouts back to follow the trail. Varnum was instructed to depart around 9 p.m., with a subsequent command following at 11 p.m. Despite the grueling march, the regiment's movements likely adhered to local time, with Wallace's 7:45 p.m. halt corresponding to 6:48 p.m. local time, too early for sunset reports, or 8:42 p.m. headquarters time, aligning better with recollections of sundown. This adjustment reveals a more realistic march speed and underscores the regiment's slow, deliberate advance through the landscape. As Varnum set off on his mission, Custer wasted no time, swiftly calling for an officers' meeting to confirm Benteen's earlier intuition about a night operation. Lieutenant Godfrey later recalled this meeting occurring around 9:30 p.m., roughly 8:33 p.m. local time, well after civil twilight had faded and darkness enveloped the area. Godfrey and his companion, Luke Hare, had just settled in for a brief rest when news of Custer's gathering reached them. The absence of campfires, a usual indicator of settling in for the night, hinted at the brief nature of their stay at Busby Bend. During the meeting, Custer outlined a daring strategy, a night march set to begin at 11 p.m., barely an hour and a half away. The objective was clear: to find a concealed position the next day, thoroughly scout the area, pinpoint the exact location of the Indian encampment, and launch a pre-dawn attack on June 26th. The meeting was concise, with no time wasted, as Benteen had already prepared for this moment. He slipped on his cavalry boots and ordered First Sergeant Joseph McCurry to ensure all men were ready for a swift departure, tightening bridles and packing gear with meticulous precision. As Benteen navigated through the darkness, he encountered Keogh, who confirmed his expectations. "No point in going to the meeting. You were right. We're moving out at 11 sharp. Oh, looks like another sleepless night for us," Keogh remarked. This would be the second consecutive night without sleep for the troops, a taxing ordeal that would wear down both men and horses alike. The relentless pace of events underscored Custer's urgency, hinting at the pivotal moments that lay ahead with no room for hesitation or delay. What stands out in these accounts is not merely the rapid succession of decisions, but the eerie calm and routine with which these seasoned officers confronted their grim reality. Sleep deprivation weighed heavily on their shoulders, the impending specter of battle loomed ominously, and life-or-death stakes were met with matter-of-fact exchanges in the darkness, revealing a striking resilience among the ranks. The soldiers' familiarity with exhaustion, alongside their resignation to sleepless nights, speaks volumes about the relentless life of these cavalrymen, a stark contrast to the more romanticized depictions often glorified in popular narratives of such campaigns. Marching through treacherous, uncertain terrain with little to no rest added layers of complexity to the strategic maneuvers they employed, forcing them to operate under extreme physical and mental duress. Custer's decision to undertake a night march, while audacious, was fraught with peril. The choice to move troops under the cover of darkness significantly increased the risk of confusion and disarray as visibility waned and the threat of miscommunication loomed large. The potential exposure to enemy scouts heightened this risk, yet it also offered the coveted element of surprise, a crucial advantage against the Sioux warriors. This delicate balance between risk and reward showcased Custer's boldness, underscoring the precarious situation in which the 7th Cavalry found itself. The regiment was navigating a maze of uncertainties, driven by necessity and instinct rather than the precise ticking of clocks. Each decision bore the weight of their collective survival, blurring the line between calculated strategy and instinctual reaction. As darkness deepened, Custer's scouts returned with unsettling news. The Sioux had turned westward, likely heading toward the lower Little Bighorn. This intelligence shifted the momentum of the night, and their recommendation to ride to a nearby promontory at dawn was swiftly incorporated into Custer's plan, demonstrating his adaptability and determination in the face of evolving circumstances. The urgency of Varnum's departure at 9 p.m. and the subsequent command issued at 11 p.m. underscored the regiment's unwavering commitment to executing the night march, even as the inherent dangers loomed larger in their collective consciousness. Ultimately, the timing discrepancies, whether operating on local sun time or St. Paul headquarters time, can be reconciled through logical analysis. The regiment's movements, though grueling, likely adhered to local time, aligning more closely with sunset reports and the soldiers' field observations. Custer's swift decisions and unwavering urgency reflect the temperament of a military leader driven by the imperative to act decisively in the face of uncertainty, an embodiment of the relentless pursuit of mission success amid the chaos of impending conflict. In the end, the regiment's journey was dictated more by necessity and instinct than by the precision of their watches. Each soldier, aware of the stakes, marched forward with a palpable sense of urgency, compelled by the mission and their loyalty to one another. As Varnum set off on his mission, Custer moved forward without delay, embodying the relentless drive that ultimately led to the tragic and historic Battle of Little Bighorn. The interplay of strategy, timing, and human factors, shrouded in the chaos of battle and the fog of war, shaped the outcome of one of history's most infamous engagements, that forever cementing Custer's legacy in the annals of military history. The lessons drawn from this harrowing experience continue to resonate in military doctrine and strategy, reminding future leaders of the thin line between audacity and recklessness.